Imagine the sun dipping low, casting long shadows, when a lone cowboy, scarred by war and loss, encounters an Apache woman, stripped of everything, pleading for help by a quiet creek. She whispered, "They stole my clothes, cowboy. Please help me." This isn't just a tale of survival. It's about an unexpected bond forged in the unforgiving frontier. What compels a man to risk his solitude and safety for a complete stranger? Join us as we uncover the incredible journey of Cole and Nia, where courage and connection defy a harsh world. Before we dive into their captivating story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more riveting frontier adventures. The sun was a painter, bleeding orange and purple across the western sky, dragging the day to a close. Cole Merrick, a man weathered by too many lonely seasons, pulled his horse to a halt near the north pasture. The hours had stretched long, leaving his cotton shirt clinging to his back with sweat, his shoulders rigid from the rhythmic sway of the saddle. He'd spent the better part of the day riding fence lines, a task as endless as the horizon itself. The creek, usually a lively torrent, was subdued this time of year, fractured into shallow, still pools beneath the rustling cottonwood trees. But it was enough. Enough for the thirsting cattle that dotted his spread. Enough for a quick check before he could finally turn his horse towards the familiar, if stark, comfort of his cabin. Cole was 37 years old, a man whose life had been carved out on the unforgiving edge of conflict and endless dust. Years back, he'd worn the Army Scout's buckskin, seen the monstrous depths men could plunge to when the eyes of the world were averted. The memories were a heavy, unspoken companion. 3 years had passed since he'd laid his wife to rest, taken by the brutal grip of spring fever. Since then, he'd retreated, built walls around his heart as sturdy as the fences he mended. The ranch, this vast, silent expanse, had become his entire universe. It was a life of quiet, honest labor, work that kept his calloused hands occupied and, more importantly, kept his mind from drifting too far back into the shadows of what he'd lost. He was deep in thought, mentally sketching out the repair needed on a sagging stretch of fence by the northern boundary, when a flicker of movement by the water's edge snagged his attention. At first his mind defaulted to deer, a common sight at dusk, seeking water before bedding down for the night. But as his eyes narrowed, piercing the deepening gloom, the shape seemed wrong, too angular, too human. A prickle, cold and unfamiliar, traced its way up his spine. Slowly, deliberately, he swung his leg over the saddle, sliding off his horse. He looped the reins loosely around a low-hanging branch of a mesquite tree, the horse snorting softly, sensing the shift in his rider's demeanor. Cole took a careful step, then another, his boots crunching on the dry, brittle grass that covered the creek bank. Every sense sharpened, every muscle tensed. He moved with the quiet stealth of an old scout, a habit forged in places where a single wrong sound could mean the end. The twilight deepened, painting the landscape in shades of charcoal and indigo, making discernment difficult, yet sharpening the awareness of the unseen. And then he saw her. The sight hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. A young woman, knee-deep in the shallow creek, her long, dark hair a cascade of black silk, glistening with water, streaming down her back. Her shoulders were hunched, rigid with a tension that spoke of absolute terror, like a cornered wild animal awaiting the final blow. What remained of her dress, if it could even be called that, clung desperately to her slender frame, ripped almost beyond recognition at the bodice, hanging open so low that Cole's throat constricted, a raw, unexpected tightening of his own. He forced his eyes away, a gentleman's reflex born of a lifetime of respect, even in this brutal land, even in this shocking moment. Her feet, he noticed then, were bare, raw and inflamed, clearly chafed from a desperate flight across unforgiving terrain. Bruises, a landscape of purple and yellow, marred her arms, some fresh, a vibrant, angry red, others fading into older, sickening shades. She was a canvas of suffering. The moment she became aware of his presence, she froze, utterly, completely. One arm instinctively flew across her chest in a desperate, futile attempt at modesty, while the other, trembling violently, pointed towards the bank. There, scattered in the mud, were scraps of fabric, damp and torn, the pathetic remnants of what had once been her belongings. Her voice, when it came, was a mere whisper, strained, broken, not just from raw fear and wrenching sobs, but from a deeper, more agonizing thirst. "They stole my clothes. Cowboy, please help me." Cole didn't speak right away. His mind, trained for rapid assessment in life-or-death situations, raced. He weighed the implications, the potential dangers. Who was she? Who might she be running from? Were her pursuers close behind, perhaps even now watching from the tree line? Would bringing her back to his solitary cabin, to his hard-won peace, invite trouble he desperately wanted to avoid? These were the practical, self-preserving questions of a man who had learned to trust very few. But then, the sheer, unvarnished fear etched onto her young face, the stark desperation in her eyes, cut through all his careful calculations, silencing the pragmatic voice of caution. It bypassed his defenses and struck something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. A primal urge to protect. He shrugged out of his heavy duster coat, the familiar weight a comfort, now a potential shield. He held it out to her, moving slowly, deliberately, his every action designed to convey reassurance, to erase any thought that he, too, meant her harm. Her dark eyes remained locked on his, piercing him with an unnerving intensity, searching for any flicker of deceit, any hidden trap. The silence stretched, long and taut, punctuated only by the rustling of the cottonwoods and the distant mournful cry of a coyote. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she snatched the coat from his outstretched hand. She turned her back to him, her shoulders hunching inward, a gesture of profound vulnerability as she pulled the heavy fabric around her body. It was a poor fit, swallowing her slender frame, but it offered a measure of dignity, a fragile barrier against the biting wind and the piercing gaze of the world. "All right," Cole said quietly, his voice a low rumble breaking the stillness. He waited, giving her a moment, a sliver of agency in a situation where she had none. Then he moved forward, his hand gently taking her elbow, guiding her towards the bank. Her skin was shockingly cold beneath his touch, despite the lingering warmth of the day. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, like a bird caught in a cage. As he helped her fully out of the water and closer to the dwindling light, he noticed more. More scratches, fine lines of agony on her legs, fresh nicks from thorns and sharp rocks. The neckline of her torn dress sagged, revealing the stark line of her ribs, a testament to hardship and hunger. Cole guided her towards his horse, a sturdy, calm mare named Belle. He lifted her, careful and gentle, when her bare feet refused to carry her further, her legs giving way beneath her. She clung to the saddle horn, her knuckles white, while he mounted behind her. Then, without a word, without being asked, her trembling hands found the back of his shirt, clutching the fabric, seeking an anchor in the storm of her terror. They rode in silence. The trail back to his cabin was long, dusty, and winding, but Cole didn't push Belle faster than Naya could bear. He could feel her shaking against his back, a constant, fragile tremor that spoke volumes of her ordeal. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, transforming the familiar landscape into a place of uncertainty. His mind was a tempest of questions, but he held them back, knowing this wasn't the time. First, safety, then answers. When they finally reached the cabin, a small, solitary sentinel against the vastness, Cole dismounted first. He steadied her as she slid off the horse, her legs almost buckling beneath her. She caught herself, a small flicker of resilience amidst her exhaustion. He led her inside, the interior a comforting haven of dimness and the scent of aged wood. He lit a lantern, the small flickering flame throwing a warm yellow light across the rough-hewn walls, chasing away the encroaching shadows. The cabin was plain, stark even. A simple wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and a cast-iron stove with a stack of neatly split wood beside it. He'd kept it that way since his wife died, a conscious choice. It was easier not to let the place feel too much like a home, too filled with memories that might overwhelm. It was a shelter, a refuge, nothing more. "You can sit," he said, his voice softer than usual, gesturing towards a folded blanket he'd placed near the hearth. She obeyed, sinking to the floor with a sigh that seemed to release a lifetime of tension. The oversized coat still wrapped tightly around her small body. Her breathing was still ragged, too fast, her eyes darting around the small room as if she expected someone else to burst in at any moment, to finish whatever torment had begun by the creek. Cole didn't press her with questions. Not yet. Her fragile state demanded patience, quiet care. He moved with purpose, building a fire in the hearth, coaxing the embers to life, the flames licking hungrily at the kindling. He set a pot of water to boil, then retrieved his small, well-worn kit of needle and thread. The remnants of her dress were a tragic sight, torn nearly in half, beyond simple repair. He worked in silence, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he stitched the tattered fabric back together. The lines were rough, uneven, certainly not the work of a seamstress, but he was careful not to pull the thread too tight, to avoid causing further discomfort. Nia watched him the entire time, her gaze unwavering, studying the methodical movements of his hands, as if trying to decipher the true nature of this silent, watchful man. She was clearly trying to decide if she could truly trust him. By the time he finished, the fire had taken hold, its warmth spreading throughout the small cabin, chasing the chill from the air. She had stopped shaking, though her eyes still held a deep, profound weariness, the shadows of recent trauma. Cole sat back on his heels, stretching out his legs, and met her gaze directly for the first time since they had entered the cabin. He still didn't know her name. He didn't know why she had been down by the creek, or what kind of cruel men had left her there, stripped of her dignity and nearly her life. But she was alive, and for tonight, she was out of immediate danger. And that, he realized, was enough. Cole set the mended dress aside, leaning back against the rough wall, letting the room fall quiet save for the gentle crackle and hiss of the fire. Tomorrow he would have to ask questions, perhaps ride into town to gather information, to understand who had done this monstrous thing. But tonight, he would simply keep watch. He would be the silent guardian against the encroaching darkness. Cole didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table, his rifle resting across his knees, its cool metal a familiar weight. His eyes were fixed on the sturdy wooden door, listening to every creak, every sigh of the wind outside. The fire burned low, casting shifting, dancing shadows across the cabin walls, turning the familiar into something eerie and watchful. Behind him, Nia lay wrapped in his coat and the blanket near the hearth, her breathing quiet yet still uneven, as if even in sleep. She half expected someone to burst through the door, to shatter the fragile peace he had provided. It wasn't the first time Cole had brought someone hurt or half-starved into his cabin. He had done it during the brutal war years. For wounded soldiers, for fellow scouts, even for deserters, when leaving them outside meant certain death. But this felt different. This was not a fellow warrior, not a man with whom he shared a common understanding of the harshness of life. He didn't know her name, didn't know the full extent of the trouble that might follow her, and that gnawing uncertainty was the very thing that kept his eyes wide open, his senses acutely alert, refusing to allow him the solace of sleep. When the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the narrow gaps in the shutters, Cole stirred the fire back to life, coaxing the embers into a renewed blaze. The comforting smell of wood smoke, a scent synonymous with home and safety, gently roused Nia. She sat up slowly, deliberately, pulling the coat tighter around her body, her long dark hair falling loose over her face, a curtain obscuring her expression. Cole set the coffee pot on the stove, waiting until the water came to a rolling boil before he spoke, his voice low and calm. "There's a wash basin outside if you want it," he said, nodding towards the door. "No one around this time of morning." She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. When she stood, the coat, despite her efforts to keep it closed, slid open just enough for Cole to catch a glimpse of deep red marks on her shoulder. Rope burns, perhaps, before she quickly pulled the fabric closed again, shielding herself. He stepped outside with her, maintaining a respectful distance while she used the basin, splashing cool water on her face, her hands trembling not just from the morning chill, but from an unseen trauma that still clung to her. Cole busied himself chopping kindling near the porch. the rhythmic thud of the axe against wood a reassuring sound, ensuring she wouldn't feel watched, wouldn't feel her privacy invaded further. Back inside, she settled near the fire again, her wet hair hanging down her back, slowly drying in the warmth. Cole poured 2 tin cups of coffee, the aroma filling the small space, and handed her one. She stared at it for a long moment, as if contemplating the very act of receiving a simple kindness, before finally taking it, her hands still trembling slightly wrapped around the warm metal. "You got a name?" he asked, his voice gentle, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. She looked up at him through the curtain of her hair, her eyes, though weary, holding a flicker of something new. "Nia?" she said softly. The word a quiet revelation. Cole nodded, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement. "I'm Cole Merrick." He waited, giving her space, allowing the simple exchange to settle, to build a fragile bridge between them. Then carefully he asked, "You want to tell me what happened?" She sat quiet for a long time, her hands wrapped tightly around the cup, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, almost too calm, the words clipped and sparse, betraying the raw pain beneath. "3 boys, white. I crossed near the town yesterday. They stopped me, laughed, took my things." Cole felt his jaw tighten, a familiar knot of anger forming in his stomach. "Just your clothes and food," she continued, her voice barely audible. "I had some corn in a sack. They threw it in the dirt." Her words came out short and clipped, a testament to the humiliation, the utter dehumanization she had endured. She kept her eyes on the fire. The sky was just starting to gray at the edges when I stirred, the chill in the air a familiar bite. The fire, which I'd kept banked through the long hours of the night, had dwindled to mere embers, casting a faint, flickering glow on the rough-hewn walls. Behind me, I heard Nia stirring, a soft rustle of the blanket and my coat as she pulled them tighter around her slender frame. She sat up slowly, a silent sentinel in the gloom. I moved to the stove, setting the coffee pot to boil, the metal clinking softly in the quiet cabin. The small sounds of morning seemed amplified in the stillness, each scrape and clatter echoing the weight of the night before. I waited until the water began to bubble, a soft hiss filling the space before I spoke. My voice was low, careful and offering. "There's a wash basin outside if you want it," I said. "No one around this time of morning." She hesitated, her dark eyes, shadowed from weariness and whatever torments haunted her, flicking toward the door, then back to me. Finally, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. When she pushed herself to her feet, the coat I'd given her shifted just enough. In that brief, accidental movement, I caught sight of something that made my gut clench. Deep red marks on her shoulder like angry, bruised ribbons. Rope burns, I thought, a cold dread seeping into me. But before I could dwell on it, she pulled the coat closed again, shielding herself. I stepped outside with her, not close, but near enough that she wouldn't feel entirely alone. I busied myself with chopping kindling on the porch, the rhythmic thwack of the axe a deliberate distraction. I kept my back mostly to her, allowing her the small privacy she craved as she used the basin, splashing water on her face, her hands trembling, not just from the morning chill, but from something deeper. When she came back inside, her hair, dark and still damp, hung loose down her back. She settled near the fire again, drawing warmth from the rekindled flames. I poured 2 tin cups of coffee, the aroma a welcome comfort, and handed her one. She stared at it for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dark surface, before finally, slowly, taking it. "You got a name?" I asked, my voice as even as I could make it. She looked up at me through the curtain of her hair, her eyes still guarded but less frantic than the night before. "Nia?" she said softly, the name barely a whisper. I nodded, a simple acknowledgement. "I'm Cole Merrick." I waited, giving her time, space to breathe, to decide. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a hawk. Then, knowing I had to, I asked, "You want to tell me what happened?" She sat quiet for what felt like an eternity, her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup, as if drawing strength from it. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, almost too calm, detached from the raw emotion I knew must be simmering beneath. 3 boys. White. I crossed near the town yesterday. They stopped me, laughed, took my things. My jaw tightened, a cold, hard knot forming in my gut. Just your clothes? I managed to ask, though the question felt inadequate. And food, she added, her voice gaining a fractional edge. I had some corn in a sack. They threw it in the dirt. Her words came out short, clipped, each one a stark, painful image. There was no mistaking the profound humiliation etched on her face, in the way her gaze stayed fixed on the fire, as though saying it aloud, giving voice to the barbarity, made it worse. My mind immediately conjured images of the boys in town, the kind who lingered around the saloon too long, their boredom turning to malice when the whiskey ran dry. I could picture them, seeing her alone on the road, tired, vulnerable, an easy target for their cruel amusement. A wave of cold, righteous fury washed over me, but I forced it down, knowing anger wouldn't help her now. You got family nearby? I asked, needing to understand more, to gauge her situation. Her voice was harder this time, devoid of the earlier fragility. No, I came north to find work. Maybe trade. Nothing left south. That told me enough. I knew what had happened to some of the Apache settlements after the last push by the army. Burned camps, families scattered, lives uprooted and destroyed. She was lucky to be alive, a survivor adrift in a world that offered little solace. The grim reality of her situation settled heavily in the air between us. I leaned back, weighing the risks. My mind, ever pragmatic, ran through the possibilities. I had no reason to keep her here, no obligation. Bringing her back toward town would undoubtedly stir up questions I didn't want to answer, draw unwanted attention. But turning her out with nothing, leaving her to the mercies of the open land and the kind of men who'd done this to her, meant she wouldn't last 2 days. It was a choice between my hard-won solitude and the simple human decency I still clung to. The fear in her eyes, the raw vulnerability I'd witnessed by the creek, cut through all my carefully constructed walls. You can stay here a while, I said finally, the words feeling right as they left my mouth, till you figure where you're headed. Her dark eyes flicked to mine, sharp and suspicious, probing, searching for a hidden motive. Why? She asked, a challenge in the single word. Because I got room and I don't let folks starve on my doorstep, I replied, my voice simple, direct, devoid of any pretense. Nia didn't answer. She just set the empty tin cup down and pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. A silent acknowledgement, a fragile acceptance. After breakfast, I brought her the mended dress. The stitches were rough, uneven lines crisscrossing the torn fabric, but it would hold. I turned my back while she changed near the corner of the cabin, staring into the flickering heart of the fire until she finally said, simply, okay. When she stepped out, the dress was clean, but tight across her chest where I had pulled the thread too close. I caught myself glancing, an instinctive reaction to the suddenness of her presence, before forcing my eyes away, focusing on the mundane. I got work to do, I said, grabbing my hat from the peg. You can rest or come with me. Up to you. I come, she said quickly, her voice low but firm, as if staying inside alone was a worse prospect than facing the outside world with me. I saddled the horse, and we walked the fence line together. Nia stayed close, a silent shadow, not speaking, just watching how I checked the posts, how I tightened the wire. At first she moved slowly, her bare feet still cut and sore, causing her to limp. But after a while, a subtle shift occurred. Without being asked, she started carrying tools for me, her movements becoming more purposeful, her gaze sharper, more engaged. By midday, the sun was high, baking the dry earth. I stopped at the creek, the same creek where I'd found her, to water the horse. Nia knelt at the bank, washing the mud from her legs, her movements careful, almost ritualistic. And I noticed how deliberately she kept her back to me. Not out of modesty, I realized, but because she was still afraid, still guarding that blind spot, unwilling to show any weakness. You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder here, I said quietly, offering a sliver of reassurance. She didn't turn, just continued her scrubbing, her voice flat. I keep watch for myself. It was a statement, not a complaint, a declaration of a deeply ingrained habit of survival. When we made it back to the cabin, I set her on the porch rail with a needle and a scrap of cloth, a practical task to keep her hands busy, her mind from wandering too far into the shadows. "You know how to sew?" I asked. She nodded once, her movements still economical, her words sparse. I left her there while I stacked wood, the rhythm of my work a steady counterpoint to her quiet mending. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, she had finished the patch on the scrap of cloth and was already threading the needle again, her focus absolute. That night I sat on the porch with my rifle across my knees, a familiar weight, watching the tree line, scanning the deepening shadows. Inside, Nia lay near the fire again, but this time her breathing came easier, a soft, more even rhythm that spoke of a fragile peace. I knew this wasn't over. Whoever those boys were, they might come looking, their bruised egos demanding further satisfaction. And if they did, I'd be ready. For now the cabin was quiet, except for the hypnotic hum of crickets outside and the soft snapping of the fire within. It was the first time since finding her that I felt something other than a cold, simmering anger. A thin, cautious sense that maybe, just maybe, she had decided not to run. The next morning I woke early as usual, the sky just starting to gray at the edges when I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cooler than the night before, a crispness that hinted at the changing season. The fire had burned down to embers, and I heard Nia stirring behind me, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders as she sat up from her blanket. I set water to boil and handed her a plate with the last of the cornbread from the night before. She ate it slowly, her eyes still glancing toward the door, as if trouble were an ever-present possibility. "You can stay inside today if you want," I said as I poured coffee, offering her the choice, the reprieve. Nia shook her head, a quick, decisive movement. "I work," she said, her voice low but firm, a clear refusal. I studied her for a moment, then nodded. I didn't want her pushing herself too hard. Her feet were still cut and sore. But I understood what she meant. Sitting inside all day, idle and vulnerable, would only make her feel cornered, helpless. It was a subtle act of defiance, a quiet assertion of her will. I handed her a pair of worn socks I'd dug out of a trunk, and told her they'd make it easier to walk. She pulled them on without complaint, then stood near the door, waiting. We spent the morning hauling water from the creek to the trough near the corral. Nia worked quietly, carrying one bucket at a time, her shoulders stiff with effort, her determination palpable. I noticed how resolute she was, refusing to rest, even when her arms began to shake, her small frame straining under the load. "You can sit a spell," I told her, my voice gentle. She just shook her head and kept walking, her gaze fixed on the task, pushing past the discomfort. By midday we had the trough full, the water glinting under the harsh sun. I brought the horse in to drink. Nia stayed near the gate, watching carefully, her body tense when the animal moved too quickly, a residual fear evident in her posture. "You ever worked around stock before?" I asked, noticing her apprehension. She shook her head. "Not horses, goats, chickens." "You'll get used to him," I said, keeping my tone calm, reassuring. "He won't hurt you." Nia nodded, but didn't move closer until I had finished brushing the horse down, her wariness a deep-seated instinct. After we ate a quiet meal back at the cabin, I went to the shed to grab tools for a repair. When I came out, Nia was sweeping the porch with a makeshift broom, her dark hair falling loose around her face, moving with a quiet efficiency. "You don't have to do that," I said, surprised by her initiative. "I do," she replied simply and kept sweeping. I didn't argue. It wasn't about the cleanliness of the porch, I realized. It was about proving something. Maybe to me, maybe to herself. An assertion of her capabilities, a reclaiming of agency. In the late afternoon, I took her down the line to check a section of fence I'd been meaning to mend. As we worked, my eyes kept tracing the horizon, scanning the distant road toward town. I hadn't seen anyone come near since the night I found her, but I couldn't shake the thought of those boys, the sneering faces, and whether they might come looking. The tension was a low hum beneath the surface of my focus. "You know their names?" I asked finally, needing to put a name to the threat. Nia hesitated, her hands stilling for a moment. "One called Clay," she said. "Others I didn't know." I nodded slowly, the name sparking a flicker of recognition. Clay? I'd heard the name before. Clay Jensen, a ranch hand's kid who spent too much time in the saloon, a reputation for being trouble looking for somewhere to happen. This confirmed my fears. "If they show up here," I said, my voice hardening, leaving no room for doubt, "you stay inside." Nia's dark eyes met mine, a silent question in their depths. "I fight them if I have to." My voice was steady, flat as iron, but she could hear the edge under it, the unwavering resolve. We finished the fence just before sundown and headed back to the cabin. When I struck a match and lit the lamp, its small flame pushing back the encroaching shadows, I noticed Nia watching me closely, as if weighing whether to speak. "You take me to town?" she asked quietly, her voice hesitant. I looked at her for a long moment, considering the implications. "Not yet," I said. "Not till I know it's safe." She didn't argue, but something in her shoulders eased, a subtle release of tension, as though she'd been afraid I might send her away, turn her out into the wilderness alone. That night I cooked beans and salt pork while Nia sat at the table mending one of my torn work shirts. She worked with quick, sure hands, her fingers adept with the needle and thread, a skill honed by necessity. When she was done, she set the shirt neatly on the table in front of me, a small gesture of care. "You sew better than I do," I said, a rare, almost appreciative remark. Her mouth almost curved into a smile, a fleeting hint of amusement, but she only said, "My mother, teach me." When the fire burned low, I rolled out my bedroll on the floor instead of taking the cot. Nia looked at me, surprised by the gesture. "You sleep there?" she asked. "Cot's yours tonight," I said simply. She hesitated, then laid down on the cot. The wind shifted just after sundown, not a gentle breeze, but a subtle, almost imperceptible turn that carried a strange scent. I was out on the porch, lantern in hand, listening to the crickets and the settling of the night. But this smell! It wasn't the familiar tang of pine or damp earth. It was wood smoke, distant and out of place, not from my hearth. A chill traced its way up my spine, a feeling I hadn't known since my Army scouting days, the kind that whispers of eyes watching from the shadows. The horses in the corral were restless too, ears flicking, heads up, sensing something out there that wasn't right. Inside, Nia was cleaning the table, her dark hair tied back with a strip of cloth, a quiet domestic rhythm that was still new to this cabin. When I stepped back inside, my face must have betrayed me, because she stopped, her hands frozen on the worn wood. "What?" she asked, her voice a low murmur that barely cut through the stillness. "Smoke," I told her, my own voice quiet, almost a breath. "Someone's camped near the North Trail." Nia's face tightened, all the fragile peace of the day dissolving in an instant. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted to the rifle leaning near the door. The unspoken question hung in the air, a heavy, cold weight. "Could be them," I admitted, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. "Could be just drovers passing through." But I didn't believe it, not for a second, and the way her jaw clenched told me she didn't either. I took the rifle, the familiar weight a small comfort in my hands, and checked the chamber. The metallic click echoed too loudly in the small space. Then I nodded toward the lamp, its small flame casting a warm, deceptive glow. "Blow that out," I said. She obeyed without a word, her breath a soft whoosh, plunging the cabin into near darkness, save for the low, dancing orange of the dying fire. The shadows suddenly seemed to grow, stretching like hungry beasts across the rough-hewn walls. I stepped back outside, crouching near the edge of the porch, letting my eyes adjust to the deepening twilight. The world narrowed to a tapestry of grays and blacks, every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a night bird amplified, scrutinized. An hour passed, a slow, agonizing crawl of seconds. My muscles began to ache from the tension, but I didn't move. Then I saw it. Movement. Low to the ground, two figures, almost one with the shadows, inching along the fence line. They were too careful, too deliberate to be strangers just passing through. My gut twisted with a cold certainty. It was them. I eased back inside, closing the door without a sound. the small click of the latch like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. "Two of them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Nia stood near the hearth, her face pale but her eyes held a steady fire. "Clay?" she asked, the name a venomous hiss on her lips. "Don't know yet, but they're watching." I barred the door, the heavy plank sliding into place with a grunt, a futile defense against men who cared nothing for boundaries. Then I motioned her closer. "If they try for the horses, we wait till they're near the corral. Then I'll step out. You fight?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with a fear that was both hers and mine. "If I have to," I said, the words heavy with grim resolve. "You stay behind the door. Rifle ready if they come for the house." Nia nodded, swallowing hard, her throat bobbing. She moved to the wall near the door, crouching low, the rifle I'd given her clutched in her hands. The next hour stretched interminably. The sounds outside came and went, each one a nail dragging across my nerves. A horse snorting, a soft scuff of boots on dirt. Then silence, thick and suffocating, before another sound broke it. Once I heard a low, guttural laugh, and I knew for certain it was Clay and one of his cronies. They were playing with us, savoring the fear they thought they were instilling. When a shadow moved near the corral gate, a figure too distinct, too bold, I acted. I unbarred the door, the wood groaning softly, then stepped out fast, rifle leveled. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and biting. "Leave the gate!" I barked, my voice like iron cutting through the night. The figures froze. One of them, taller, broader, with a hat pulled low, was indeed Clay. Even in the pale moonlight, the smug, entitled smirk on his face was unmistakable. "Evening, Merrick," Clay drawled, his tone too casual, too insolent. "Didn't mean no harm. Just passing through." "You're a long way from the saloon," I shot back, my finger hovering near the trigger. "Turn around and keep walking." Clay didn't move. He took a few steps closer, his boots crunching on the dry grass. "Heard you got company," he sneered, his eyes flicking towards the cabin. "Thought we'd see for ourselves." My finger brushed the trigger guard. "You saw enough. Go." The other boy, a smaller, more skittish sort, shifted nervously, glancing toward the trees, towards an escape route. "Come on, Clay," he muttered, his voice anxious. "Ain't worth it." Clay ignored him, his gaze locked on mine, a challenge blazing in his eyes. "You think you can keep her?" I didn't draw. "Not yet." My hand hovered, trembling with a contained fury. "I think you should finish your drink and ride the other direction." The bartender's throat clearing from earlier in town seemed to echo in my mind, a phantom warning. Clay stared at me a moment longer, then spat in the dirt, a contemptuous gesture. "This ain't over," he declared, his voice a low growl of promise. "You can't keep her forever." "Watch me," I said, the words a silent oath. Clay finally backed off, muttering under his breath, his companion already halfway to his horse. They disappeared into the trees as quickly as they'd come, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there, rifle still raised, until I couldn't hear the receding hoofbeats anymore, until the last vestige of their presence had dissolved into the vast, indifferent night. When I went back inside, Nia was still crouched near the door, the rifle clutched in her hands, her knuckles white. Her breathing was quick, shallow, but her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim firelight, were steady. "They gone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For now," I said, setting the heavy bar back in place, feeling the weight of the cabin's fragile security. She stood slowly, her movements stiff, and set the rifle back near the wall. For a moment, she just stood there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if holding herself together. Then she said, the words heavy with a bleak certainty, "They come back." "Maybe," I admitted, leaning against the door frame, the lingering adrenaline making my hands tremble slightly. "But they know I'll be waiting." Nia moved closer to the fire, staring into the embers like she was trying to see past the flames, past the present moment, into an uncertain future. "You could send me away then. No trouble." I shook my head, the weariness settling deep into my bones. "Not happening. Trouble's not you, it's them." My voice was firm, resolute, "and running only makes it worse." Nia looked at me for a long moment, something in her expression shifting, softening. It wasn't quite gratitude, not yet, but something deeper, more profound. She reached for the coat I'd given her that first night, the one she'd snatched from my hands by the creek, and pulled it around herself again, a familiar, comforting gesture. I saw the change in her then. Fear was still there, a constant companion, but now there was something steadier, a thin, cautious thread of trust beginning to weave itself into the fabric of our shared existence. Neither of us slept much that night. I sat near the door with the rifle across my lap, my eyes fixed on the shadows, listening to every creak of the cabin, every whisper of the wind. Nia stayed by the fire, wrapped in the coat and blanket, until it burned down to embers, until the cold began to seep in from the corners of the room. When she finally laid down on the cot, she didn't wrap herself as tight in the blanket as before. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. At first light, I went out to check the corral. The horses were unharmed, but I found boot tracks in the soft, damp dirt near the gate, clear evidence that they had been closer than I liked. I erased them with my heel methodically before Nia came outside. We worked together that morning, hauling water, feeding the stock. Nia didn't speak until we sat down to eat. The quiet meal broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant calls of birds. "You not afraid?" she asked suddenly, her dark eyes, still weary, meeting mine across the small table. "Of what?" I asked, taking a long drink of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "Of them," she said, her gaze steady. I took another moment, gathering my thoughts. "I've been afraid of worse," I admitted. The memories of war, of loss, a distant ache. Fear's just something that keeps you awake. You don't let it run you. Nia nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the tin cup. "I try," she said, her voice soft, almost a sigh. "You did fine last night," I told her, my voice gentle, hoping to offer some comfort, some acknowledgement of her courage. That brought the faintest hint of a smile to her lips. Small, fleeting, but real. By evening, the cabin felt different, less like a place we were hiding in, more like a place we were both holding together. I sharpened my knife at the table, the metallic scrape a counterpoint to Nia's steady breathing as she mended another one of my torn work shirts. She worked with quick, sure hands, her mother's lessons evident in every neat stitch. When she was done, she set the shirt neatly on the table in front of me. "You sew better than I do," I said, a rare attempt at humor. Her mouth almost curved into a smile again, a fragile beginning, but she only said, "My mother, teach me." And when the wind outside shifted again, carrying with it no strange smells, only the scent of fresh earth and approaching night, we both looked toward the door at the same time, a silent, shared understanding. Ready. Whatever came next, we wouldn't face it as strangers anymore. The rain started just before dark, light at first, a gentle patter on the roof, and then steady, a soothing rhythm that filled the small room. We stayed inside, the sound of water on the roof a comforting presence. Nia sat on the cot, brushing her wet hair with her fingers, a peaceful domestic scene that felt utterly foreign given the events of the previous night. I sat at the table carving a new handle for the shovel with my knife, the quiet work a balm to my raw nerves. After a long time, Nia's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "You fought for me." I didn't look up immediately, my gaze fixed on the wood grain. "You didn't need to see them take another thing from you," I said, the memory of her torn dress, her raw feet, still sharp in my mind. She was silent, and when I finally glanced at her, her eyes were shiny in the firelight, reflecting the dancing flames. "You could have sent me away," she said, her voice almost accusatory, but laced with a deeper question. "I told you before," I said, meeting her gaze, letting her see the unwavering conviction there. "I don't leave folks to fend for themselves." Nia stood slowly and crossed the room. She stopped just in front of me, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of smoke and damp earth in her hair, the clean smell of her skin. "You still look away," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine, seeking an answer to a question only she could pose. I set the knife down, the carving abandoned, and met her eyes fully, no longer deflecting. "I'm trying to do right by you," I confessed, the words an honest admission. Nia didn't speak. She just reached down, took my rough hand in hers, her fingers calloused but gentle, and placed it against her shoulder where the rope burn had been. The skin was healing, a pale pink against her darker skin, but still marked a ghost of the violence she had endured. My breath came slow, held captive in my chest. "You sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, needing her consent, her affirmation. She nodded once, a small decisive movement. I didn't rush. I stood, still holding her hand, and brushed back a strand of her dark hair that had fallen forward. A simple, tender gesture. When I touched her cheek, her skin soft beneath my thumb, she didn't flinch. She leaned into my touch, her eyes unwavering. "You're safe here," I said softly, the words a promise etched into the very air around us. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a conviction that resonated deep within me. When I kissed her, it wasn't hard or hurried, not born of desperation or passion uncontrolled, but careful, almost testing, a question whispered between us. She leaned into it, one hand clutching my shirt, like she was anchoring herself there, finding purchase in a world that had tried to tear her apart. When we finally pulled apart, she stayed close, resting her forehead against my chest, her breath a soft warmth against my shirt. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her still, holding her close. Neither of us said much after that. We ate supper quietly, the rain still drumming softly on the roof, the fire crackling contentedly. The morning after the rain, the sky was washed clean, the air sharp and cool. Cole woke to find Nia still lying beside him, her dark hair spilling across his shoulder. For a long moment he just stayed there, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. When she opened her eyes, there was no startle this time, only a steady look that made his chest feel tight. "You sleep?" he asked quietly. Nia nodded. "First time," she said. Cole sat up, pulled on his boots, and went to stir the fire back to life. The cabin smelled of damp wood and last night's ashes, but it felt different now. Lived in, not just a place to wait out trouble. When they finished breakfast, Cole saddled the horse. "I'm riding into town," he said. Nia's face shifted, the calm she had gained the night before slipping just a little. "You stay here?" she asked. "You can come," Cole said, watching her carefully. "Your choice, but if you do, you stay close to me." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I come." The road into town was still muddy from the night's rain, so they rode slow, the horse picking its way carefully. Cole felt Nia's hands grip the back of his shirt. Not in fear exactly, but like she was bracing herself. When they reached the main street, people were out early hauling water, sweeping the front of the stores. Conversation slowed when they saw Nia riding behind him. Cole felt the eyes on them, but he didn't turn his head. He tied the horse outside the general store and helped Nia down. She kept her chin high, shoulders squared, though Cole could see how tight her jaw was. Inside, the storekeeper looked up from behind the counter, eyebrows raising slightly when he saw who had come in. Cole nodded once. "Need flour, sugar, coffee, nails," Cole said. The man packed the order without comment, though his eyes flicked to Nia now and then. She stayed near Cole, her hands clasped in front of her, but when another customer came in, a man about Clay's age, she went rigid. Cole saw it. He stepped just enough to put himself between her and the door, his voice even. "You got a problem? You take it somewhere else." The man held up his hands. "No trouble, Merrick. Just shopping." When they left the store, Nia let out a slow breath as though she'd been holding it the whole time. "You did not look away," she said softly as Cole tied the parcels to the saddle. "Wouldn't have mattered if I did," Cole said. "Folks see what they want to see. Let 'em." They stopped at the blacksmith before heading out of town, and Cole heard the talk from two men standing nearby. Whispers about Clay being thrown out of the saloon the night before, drunk and yelling about the woman up at Merrick's place. Cole didn't speak of it until they were halfway home. "Word's out," he said. Nia was silent for a while. "Then they come," she said. "Maybe," Cole admitted. "But I'll be ready." When they got back to the cabin, Nia helped him unload the supplies, moving with more purpose than before. She swept out the cabin, started a pot of beans, and even took the wash down to the creek. Cole watched her for a while before joining her, kneeling beside her as she scrubbed the cloth against the rock. "You're not running?" he asked. Nia looked at him, her eyes steady. "I ran before. No more." That night they sat outside on the porch while the sky turned orange with sunset. Cole had his rifle across his lap, and Nia sat close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. "They stare in town," she said finally. "They can stare," Cole said. "Doesn't change a thing." Nia was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You tell them I stay here." "I just did," Cole said simply. Nia turned her face toward him, and there was something almost like relief in her expression. She didn't smile, not fully, but her hand found his where it rested on his knee. Cole's fingers closed around hers. When they went inside, Nia moved to the cot without waiting for him to ask. Cole sat down beside her, and for the first time, she reached for him first, pulling him close. Later, after the fire burned down low, they lay side by side again, but there was no distance between them now. Cole's arm rested over her waist, and Nia's breathing was calm, no longer tight with fear. Outside, the night sounds returned. Crickets, the distant howl of a coyote. But inside, the cabin was steady and warm. Whatever might come down the trail, they would face it together. The next 2 days passed with an uneasy quiet. Cole stayed close to the cabin, working the fence, and keeping the rifle within reach. Nia worked beside him, hanging wash, cooking, even patching the garden beds. But the way her eyes cut toward the tree line told him she hadn't forgotten the night Clay came. It was near sundown on the third day when the sound of hooves broke the calm. Cole was stacking wood near the shed and froze, listening. Not one horse, 3. They were coming fast, the sound carrying sharp through the evening air. "Naye," he called, his voice low but urgent. She was on the porch, already gripping the rifle he'd left near the door. Cole took it from her and checked the chamber before handing it back. "Stay inside," he said. "I stay by the door," she said, her jaw set. Cole didn't argue. He stepped off the porch and stood near the corral, rifle loose in his hands, but ready. The riders came into view, Clay and 2 others, dust rising behind them. They slowed as they neared the cabin, stopping just far enough that Cole had to raise his voice to be heard. "You're trespassing," Cole called. Clay grinned from the saddle. "Easy, Merrick. We just came to talk." "Talk from the road," Cole said. Clay swung a leg over and dropped to the ground, taking a few steps closer. "You got no right keeping her up here like she's yours," he said. Cole felt his jaw tighten. "She's not yours either." The second rider spat in the dirt. "She don't belong here. You know it." "She stays where she wants," Cole said. Clay's grin widened. "Does she? Or is she too scared to run?" Cole heard the floorboard creak behind him. Nia had stepped just inside the door. Her voice came steady, louder than he'd ever heard it. "I stay here," she said. Clay's grin faltered for a second. "Girl, you don't know what you're saying." "I know," Nia cut him off. "You take my clothes, you laugh, I not run again." The air went still. Clay's face hardened and he took another step forward. That was enough. Cole raised the rifle, steady sighting down the barrel. "Mount up," he said. Clay stared at him, weighing whether to push it. The other 2 were already backing toward their horses. "This ain't over," Clay said finally. "It is if you keep riding," Cole said. Clay spat once more, then swung into the saddle and wheeled his horse around. They rode off slow at first, then faster as they hit the trail. Cole stood there until the sound of hooves faded completely, then lowered the rifle. He turned back toward the cabin. Nia was still by the door, her hands tight around the rifle she held. "You all right?" Cole asked. She nodded, though her chest rose and fell fast. "They not stop." "No," Cole said, stepping closer. "But they know now. They know you got a place here." Nia's grip on the rifle loosened. She set it back near the wall, then stepped off the porch and came to him. Her hands were dirty from the door frame, but she placed one flat against his chest. "You stand for me," she said. Cole nodded. "Every time." Her fingers curled in the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. Cole didn't hesitate. He bowed his head and kissed her. This time not careful, but certain. She didn't flinch. She leaned into him, her hands gripping his back. When they finally stepped apart, the tension in her shoulders was gone. Inside the cabin that night, they sat close by the fire. Cole cleaned the rifle, set it within reach, then looked at Nia. If they come again, we might have to go to the sheriff. Make it official. Nia tilted her head. Official means no one can touch you without paying for it, Cole said. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Then we go. Later, when they lay down on the cot, Nia didn't wait for him to reach for her. She pressed herself against him, her head under his chin, and let out a long, slow breath. Cole rested his hand against the curve of her back. For the first time since he'd found her, he let himself think past tomorrow, past the fence repairs, past watching the horizon for riders, and pictured a life where she was here because she chose to be, not because she had nowhere else to go. Outside, the night was quiet again, but it wasn't the fragile quiet of fear. It was the kind that came after a line had been drawn and held. The next morning, Cole saddled the horse before the sun was fully up. The air was cool, the sky pale, and the sound of boots on the porch brought Nia outside. "You go?" she asked, her voice calm but watchful. "Into town," Cole said. "Best we end this before it starts again." "You coming?" She hesitated for just a heartbeat, then nodded. "I come." They rode in together, slower this time, not hiding. When they reached town, people turned to watch just like before. But Cole didn't look away. He tied the horse in front of the sheriff's office and helped Nia down, keeping his hand on her back as they walked inside. The sheriff, a man in his 50s with a tired face, looked up from his desk. "Merrick," he said, then glanced at Nia. "Heard some talk." "You heard right," Cole said. "3 boys, Clay Jensen and 2 others, came to my place at night. Tried to spook my stock, threatened her." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "Clay's been trouble before. I'll ride out, speak to his old man. Make sure it don't happen again." "Talking's not enough," Cole said flatly. "If they set foot on my place again, it won't be words next time." The sheriff studied him, then nodded. "I'll make it clear." His gaze shifted to Nia. "You want to press charges?" Nia stood straighter. "I want them stay away," she said. "I want man take my clothes, my food, my name." The sheriff nodded again, slower this time. "Reckon we can make that happen. I'll put it down in writing." By the time they left, Cole could feel some of the tension ease from Nia's shoulders. Outside, she stood for a moment looking down the street. The same men who had whispered the last time were there, watching. This time Nia didn't look away. On the ride home, she was quiet, but not in the same weary way as before. When they reached the cabin, she slid down from the saddle and turned to face him. "You make it safe," she said simply. Cole untied the parcels from the saddle and set them on the porch. "Safe's not just my job," he said. "But yeah, it's safe now." That evening, Nia cooked stew while Cole mended a broken strap on the saddle. When they sat down to eat, the cabin felt warmer than it ever had, not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding between them. After supper, Nia took out the comb Cole had bought for her weeks earlier and braided her hair carefully. When she was done, she turned to him. "You give me this," she said, touching the comb. "You fix my dress. You fight for me." "Why?" Cole set the strap aside and met her eyes. "Because I want you here. Not because you need a place. Because you choose it." Nia was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I choose," she said. She crossed the room, knelt in front of him, and took his hand. "I stay." Cole's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Then we make this home for good." Later, when the fire burned low, they sat on the porch together. The air was still, the stars sharp overhead. Cole's arm rested around her shoulders, and Nia leaned against him, her eyes half closed. "They not come back," she said. "No," Cole said. "And if they do, they'll find we're ready." For a while, they just sat there, the night quiet around them. Cole thought about the past weeks. The first night by the creek, the fear in her eyes, the bruises on her skin. All of that felt far away now, not gone, but changed into something that no longer owned her. When they finally went inside, Cole didn't bother with his bedroll on the floor. He lay beside her on the cot, the firelight soft across the room. And for the first time, it felt less like shelter and more like a home built for 2. The next morning, Cole went out to check the fence. And when he turned back, Nia was standing on the porch, her hair braided, the mended dress fitting clean and proud. She was holding a small bundle of seeds he bought on their last trip, ready to plant. Cole smiled, the kind of smile he hadn't felt in years. "Let's get to work," he said. They worked side by side that morning, hands in the soil, the sun coming up warm and bright. For the first time, there was no urgency, no fear, just the quiet rhythm of building something that would last. When Cole stood and looked at her, dirt on her hands and a small, rare smile on her face, he knew without doubt that she wasn't just passing through. She was part of the land now, part of him. And this time, he wasn't letting go. From a chance encounter born of desperation by a quiet creek, Cole and Naya forged a powerful partnership. Their journey became a testament to finding belonging in the most unlikely of circumstances, transforming a simple cabin into a true home. They defied a harsh world to create their own peace, proving that courage and connection can thrive on the frontier. What aspect of their enduring bond resonated most deeply with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell and subscribe so you won't miss our next captivating frontier adventure.